A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. I am glad that you're with us on the program today. Oh boy, we're delving back into the issue of the ATF and their arbitrary and capricious rulemaking. Yep, last time we were talking about the honey badger pistol that the ATF had suddenly declared was not a pistol at all. And in fact, it was a short-barreled rifle because of the pistol brace that is attached to the honey badger. And then shortly after we did our interview with Josh Savani, NRA-ILA's Director of Research and Information, actually, I guess it was right before we talked with Josh Savani, the ATF had suspended for 60 days their determination letter that they had sent off to honey badger. Well, now it looks like things may be actually expanding in terms of these new ATF regulations. A law firm recently put out an alert to clients. This is the Wiley law firm, talking about an ATF interpretive change restricting handgun imports that could ultimately require National Firearms Act registration for guns that are currently owned by gun owners. I know that this has got a lot of folks talking and a lot of folks freaked out. So I wanted to reach back out to Josh Savani, NRA-ILA's Director of Research and Information, to talk about these new, and again, these are not public determinations that the ATF is sending out. They're sending out private letters to, individual firms that are trying to import these firearms, say, well, last month, this handgun may have passed the sporting purposes test, and we would have approved it to be imported in the United States. But this month we've said no. It really is that quick. And as Josh explains, this isn't really a matter of the ATF moving the goalposts for importers, but it's a matter of changing the playing field itself. Yeah, I mean, it's really unbelievable. Take a look and a listen. Josh, thanks so much, sir, for coming back on the program. It's good talking to you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cam. It's always good to be here.
Last time we had you on, we were talking about the honey badger and the ATF's ruling, which was then, I guess, suspended for 60 days, declaring that the honey badger AR pistol is actually a short-barreled rifle. Now it seems like ATF may be expanding their new definition and their private definition to encompass virtually all AR and AK style pistols here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of concern, certainly based on the actions that ATF is taking, kind of all at the same time, especially here this close to an election. But they're definitely different things. I think that the new information that kind of came out in the last week has to do primarily with, at least for right now, hopefully have to do with the import of certain handguns and pistols, and what ATF considers a handgun for the purposes of things being able to be imported. So I think that's one of the things for people to really keep clear is that this issue is not as much about the pistol braces as it is about what is and is not legally a handgun or pistol under federal law. Because so just as a little bit of background, this gets a little bit complicated. The federal law generally bans the import of firearms, and then importers have to actually essentially have to get their firearms evaluated by ATF to see if they meet the standards for import. This is one of the several sporting purpose tests in federal law that have been pretty manipulated by ATF over the last 50 or so years, and it can sometimes, again, just like we're talking about with honey badger, it feels like the goalposts are often moving. But in this case, it's like they flipped the ends of the field almost. Like something that would have normally been totally fine to import. Generally, it's easier to import handguns and pistols because there's a factoring point system that, as long as the handgun has a sufficient number of points, you can look at it, and most attorneys or importers that work in this field can look at a handgun and tell, yeah, that's going to be importable because it's going to have enough points under the handgun factoring criteria. And usually, large frame handguns, because what Congress was trying to do with the sporting purpose test as regards to handguns, was keep out. So in 1968, there was this. If you look at the congressional record, there was concern over, small concealable imported handguns. That's really what the sporting purpose test was designed to keep out at all. They didn't know exactly how to describe that, I guess, and so they gave a lot of leeway to the agency to decide what's readily adaptable or particularly suitable for sporting purposes.
Right.
But if you look what they're really worried about, it was these small concealable handguns. So big frame pistols, like we're talking about in this case, like a pistol based off of an AR platform or a pistol based off of, something similar, like some type of large frame amount of pistol. Generally are get easily enough points. It's not even close because they're like the polar opposite of what Congress was trying to keep out with the sporting purpose test. So what ATF is really changing in this case is that they're saying that, well, actually something can be too big. Like this is, as we often find with gun laws, like, it's too hot or too cold, it's too big or too small, it's, too heavy or too light. There's like some Goldilocks zone for regulators for these things to be within. And I think that Goldilocks zone is they try to make fewer and fewer things fit in it is always the goal for people that don't like guns, is to say that, this is too heavy, so it can't be a pistol. And that's really what's happening here is they're saying, well, some of these pistols actually, they're too heavy to even be or maybe too long or something to even be a handgun.
And again, all this is sort of arbitrary and it's done behind the scenes. None of these determinations are public. These are not formal rules. I mean, well, in a way, they are formal rules, but the public doesn't get to comment on the ATF's reinterpretation of these policies. I'm looking at an advisory from the Wiley law firm, and they talk about in some of the new letters that the ATF's been sending out, they are now listing quote unquote objective design features like the incorporation of rifle sights, utilization of rifle caliber ammunition, the incorporation of rifle length barrel, the weapon's heavy weight, as you just talked about, the ability to accept detachable magazines, that they say would, quote, contribute to the overall weight of the firearm, as well as the overall length of the firearm, which creates a, quote, front-heavy imbalance when held in one hand. But Wiley says that the ATF notes as well in their most recent private ruling that the above design features are, quote, neither binding on future classifications nor is any factor individually determinative. So again, Josh, we're left with these really vague standards that importers have to follow now. And what does this mean for gun owners who may own one of these firearms that the ATF is now going back and saying, well, I don't know that these actually do meet the sporting purposes test?
Yeah. So I think you hit the nail right on the head with the idea that there's no way the only reason we know about this is because Wiley happened to write this article noting letters that some of their clients received. Mm-hmm. If that hadn't happened, these secret agency determinations that they then may try to use against somebody in the future, the person wouldn't even know about it. And as far as somebody that currently has one, the standard is on the import of them, assumingly the importer received, like I said, since firearms generally have to be approved for import. Mm-hmm. If a firearm was imported, then once it's in the country legally, that should be the end of it as far as for a gun owner that currently possesses one. ATF did kind of indicate in one of the letters, though, that they may look at prior classifications, and they said that is not reversing because there's the Federal Administrative Procedures Act is very strict on agencies reversing their rules, because it's generally just about good governance. It's not really Administrative Procedures Act doesn't really have anything to do with with firearms specifically, but it's really about a system of good governance, and we don't want federal agencies just changing, the law back and forth. So they're trying to get around this idea that they're not reversing their prior decisions by saying, I think the Wiley article notes that they try to claim that, well, making a new determination is not necessarily reversing a past one, even if it's exactly the opposite somehow. I'm not exactly sure how you get there. But that seems to be their claim. I think the real concern is how they're, by looking at, by saying things aren't handguns. And Wiley notes this in the article. By saying a particular firearm is not a handgun, that does create problems potentially for gun owners in the United States, because generally a firearm that's under 26 inches in overall length has to be a pistol to not be subject to the provisions of the National Firearms Act.
Yeah.
So again, it could be, so there's a category under the NFA called any other weapon, because the NFA was designed to go after concealable handguns, and then handguns were removed. These other concealable firearms were kind of left in the NFA. It doesn't really make any sense. None of it makes any sense. But the problem is that if you have a firearm that's under 26 inches in overall length, as long as it's a pistol, it's not subject to the NFA. But now with ATF saying, well, certain things are too big and too heavy to be handguns, that potentially puts gun owners that own those domestically in jeopardy of potentially owning an AOW. Now, ATF hasn't said that yet. That's just Wiley saying, well, if you take what ATF is doing over here and apply it to the same definition in another area of law, this is what would happen. It's very likely that ATF just didn't even think about those second order consequences of, changing their import determinations.
Let's hope. But as you say, even if these are unintended consequences, if the ATF were to try to apply this rule consistently, there would be consequences for gun owners. I mean, we've talked about this, Josh, in the scope of Joe Biden's gun ban plans, where he wants to require Americans who don't hand over their so-called assault weapons and large capacity magazines to register them under the National Firearms Act. If you're found in possession of an NFA item that is not registered, that's a 10-year federal prison sentence. That's a $250,000 fine. I mean, these are serious criminal consequences for people who would just be maintaining possession of the gun that they legally purchased.
Right. And I would claim are engaged in constitutionally protected conduct. You know, so you shouldn't be able to, that shouldn't be able to be criminalized, period. But there's very serious criminal penalties for violations of the NFA. And it puts a lot of people in jeopardy. And that's why gun owners generally get very concerned when, the ATF starts tinkering with definitions that, could apply to the NFA. Now, I think one of the interesting things in this case is ATF is kind of making a case for pistol braces. Because they're saying, oh, these are too big or too heavy to easily use with one hand. Theoretically, if the same firearm with a brace, that wouldn't be the problem, because the brace actually helps you use a bigger and heavier firearm with just one hand. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that they were thinking about that. And that's actually one of the things that I think some confusion that I've seen, on the internet, on forums and elsewhere, pistols in the U.S. with pistol braces are generally going to be over 26 inches in overall length. Because as long as the brace is not side folding, this is another silly ATF determination that when a brace side folds, it's measured with it closed. But generally, a pistol brace on a pistol, the overall length of the firearm is going to be more than 26 inches, and so it's not going to be an AOW. So usually we're going to be talking, there are some with very short barrels that could be, or guns with short receivers. But usually a pistol with a brace on it is still even if it's considered to be a firearm and so not a pistol, it's not going to have that AOW problem. It might, if it has a short barrel. But again, the ATF would be kind of encouraging the use of pistol braces, because if pistols without braces on them are under 26 inches in overall length, then they'd be an AOW. But with a brace, they're not. If some of the other actions we've seen, like we talked about last time, seems ATF is trying to crack down on pistol braces. The incentive that this change makes is for everyone to put a brace on any type of large frame pistol.
Okay, so again, the ATF appears to be working at cross purposes with itself at this point. And, Josh, I mean, look, so much of, I think, what happens in the future with these issues depends on what happens next Tuesday on Election Day. If Donald Trump is reelected, then I have much more hope and faith that a Trump administration would rein in some of these abuses and the confusion, and would try to ensure that we've got some clear, definable rules that can be followed, that aren't being changed on a whim. If Joe Biden wins next Tuesday, honestly, I mean, I'm afraid that the ATF is going to be empowered to do far more than what we've already seen over the past few weeks.
Exactly. I mean, I think that we all know that these changes are coming this late in the administration because they think they can get away with it, potentially hoping that it's for a Biden administration. I think that the best thing that all gun owners can do is to make sure that doesn't happen, and that, President Trump is reelected next Tuesday, and that we end up with, an actual, and then in the very near future after that, we end up with a new confirmed ATF director who's actually going to rein in this, it's kind of gone rogue at this point.
Absolutely. All right. Well, listen, what's your final advice for gun owners right now who are concerned and confused by these private letters that the ATF is now sending out and the alerts that are going around? What's your bottom line takeaway for gun owners right now in terms of, if they've got one of these firearms that they're now concerned, maybe it's going to be considered an AOW. What do I do with my brace? What's your advice for gun owners?
So as I said, ATF hasn't said anything about this new change to the definition of handgun, potentially their interpretation of the definition of handgun, potentially applying to domestically possessed firearms. Mm-hmm. Certainly a concern in the future. So I don't think, as of right now, gun owners really need to worry about that being applied that way. I think the best thing that's going to happen is that the import determination is actually going to get overturned. And then they'll go back to the old way. Again, the best way for that to occur is for President Trump to get reelected, to make sure that they have, actual leadership that's making sure that they correctly apply the law. But for right now, I don't think that there is necessarily an effect on people in current possession. So I guess that's at least the upside. For anybody that's particularly concerned, AOWs, like some other NFA firearms, they're not subject to the same rules as machine guns, where once something's been a machine gun, it's always a machine gun. Mm-hmm. So if it is, if you look at some of the initial guidance that was put out, before the honey badger determination was suspended, there was guidance put out about, disassembling the firearm in a way that made it no longer subject to provisions of the NFA. That would likewise apply here, where if a firearm is no longer in that configuration, it's not like the receiver isn't tainted like it is with a machine gun, where once something's been made into a machine gun, in ATF line it always is. Okay. All right. Well, that is good to know. Hopefully that will at least give a little peace of mind to some folks. And in the meantime, I imagine let's talk again here in a week or two when the dust is settled after the election, and I think we'll have a much better idea of what the immediate future is going to look like in terms of these ATF rules and regulations. But in the meantime, Josh, again, thank you so much for coming on the program. Thanks for everything you do, and look forward to talking to you again very soon. Absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me.
You bet. Josh Savani joined us, NRA-ILA's Director of Research and Information here on Bearing Arms Cam & Company. I appreciate Josh coming on to explain everything. I mean, I know this is a complicated issue, and you start getting into, the legalese within the National Firearms Act and the legalese within the ATF, and maybe some folks' eyes start to glaze over, but this is incredibly important. And again, this seems to be an abuse by the ATF, introducing these, again, extraordinarily arbitrary new rules in the weeks before the election. There have been rumors that this is an attempt by some employees of the ATF to, throw an October surprise at Donald Trump, make gun owners angry at Donald Trump. Look at what Trump's ATF is doing. I can guarantee you this isn't, these are not Donald Trump supporters at the ATF who are doing this, but this is, as Josh and I talked about, a sign of things to come if Joe Biden is elected. Even before Biden's gun ban, magazine ban, the buyback, quote unquote, and the confiscation, you can either hand over your guns to the government or you can pay $200 to register them under the National Firearms Act. Even before that legislation would be introduced in Congress, there is already, so much that a Biden-Harris administration could do administratively through executive orders or, again, through using the ATF to weaponize regulations against legal law-abiding gun owners in this country. It is another reason why it is so vitally important that every gun owner get out and vote on Tuesday, if you haven't done so already. All right, let's turn our attention now to our good deed of the day, our armed citizen story, our recidivist report. We'll start there with a case out of Las Vegas, where a woman accused of fatally shooting a neighbor had a history of disputes, including an arrest just in 2019 that apparently led to virtually no consequences. 34-year-old Tolian Banks of Las Vegas was arrested on Monday. She's now facing charges of open murder with a deadly weapon, carrying or concealing a weapon without a permit, as well as a parole violation. According to an arrest report, Banks had been in multiple disputes with at least 4 of her neighbors over the past month, including at least one other physical fight, before she allegedly shot Marcus Dumpson on Monday. Investigators reviewed Dumpson's girlfriend, son. I guess the shooting was on Saturday. She was arrested on Monday. Investigators interviewed Dumpson's girlfriend, son, several of the neighbors who talked about the dispute with Banks leading up to the shooting on Saturday. Police report indicates that Dumpson's girlfriend had been in ongoing disputes with Banks over the last month. The argument escalated into a physical fight between Dumpson's girlfriend and Banks approximately 2 weeks ago when Banks entered the woman's apartment and confronted her. Police believe on Saturday night that Banks approached Dumpson's girlfriend and another resident with her 2 children behind her. Multiple neighbors arrived shortly after an argument began, reported that Banks had pepper sprayed all of the individuals, then produced a handgun and shot Dumpson once in the stomach before driving off, leaving her kids behind. Yeah, shot a man, took off, leaving her 2 children. Metro Homicide Lieutenant Ray Spencer said Saturday night Child Protective Services were coming to collect the children. According to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Banks has a prior conviction from 2019 when she was found guilty of attempted battery with substantial bodily harm. In February of this year, she was sentenced to 3 years probation. Yep. Oh, by the way, that probation has now been revoked after her arrest on murder charges, but the first violent crime that she was sentenced for earlier this year, slap on the wrist, sent on her way, and now again in Las Vegas, Nevada, Tolian Banks facing even more serious charges in the death of a 31-year-old man, Marcus Dumpson. Our armed citizen story of the day from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, my old stomping grounds. Don't have a lot of information here, but the police say that an alleged burglar was shot and killed by a homeowner in the northwest part of the city. It was around 8 p.m. Wednesday night. Officers called to a home in the 2800 block of North Drexel Avenue on a reported burglary. Investigators say that knocked into the home, confronted the alleged burglar, and during that confrontation, the burglar was shot and killed. Resident involved in the shooting was interviewed and released. The investigation does continue, but at this point, again, looks like a case of self-defense there in northwest Oklahoma City. We'll keep our eyes out for any more updates. We'll bring them to you as they become available. And finally today, our good deed of the day. East Nashville, Tennessee, where a police officer in the right place at the right time and willing and able to save the life of a choking baby. Officer Philip Claiborne with the Metro Nashville Police Department was among the officers who were investigating a car crash on Shelby Avenue on Tuesday when a mother came running up to them, asking for aid because her child was struggling to breathe. Philip Claiborne says you can't stop yourself from thinking about your own kids. He has been an officer with the Metro Nashville Police Department for about 19 months. He says his training kicked into action when a woman began screaming that her infant son was choking. He said she was panicked. She was frantic. I could tell she was looking for help. 9-month-old, barely breathing at that point. He said, I visually checked the child's airway. I didn't see any obstructions, but I could hear the baby was gasping for air and wasn't making any other kind of noises other than that. So he performed the infant Heimlich maneuver. Said, I knelt down, I turned the baby over, kind of palmed its chest in my hand, rested my hand on my leg, gave the baby one good smack on its back, and immediately the baby started coughing and crying. And that's what you want to hear. Claiborne says he's not a hero, says he was just doing his job. I imagine that mom would disagree, and I would disagree as well. I mean, yes, it may have all been in a day's work for Officer Philip Claiborne, but it was still a very, very good deed performed by that officer, and we're glad that he was able to do it. All right, that is going to do it, speaking of doing things, for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Thank you, as always, for being a part of the program. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to talk with another hero, Stephen Williford, and a guy who, again, doesn't describe himself as a hero, doesn't see himself as a hero, but in the eyes of many Americans, he absolutely is, the hero of Sutherland Springs. Stephen Williford, asleep in his home when the gunshots started happening across the street at the local church. He got up, he grabbed his gun, he ran out of his home, he confronted that attacker, helping to put a stop to the attack in Sutherland Springs. Now Stephen Williford is speaking out about another threat, a threat to our right to keep and bear arms posed by the Obama-Biden administration. And Stephen Williford is going to join me tomorrow on Bearing Arms Cam & Company to talk about that threat and who he's voting for in the 2020 election. We'll see you then. Until then, don't forget, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube. That way you'll never miss a program. Or if you just like the audio version, you don't need to see the daily growth of the beard. That's fine. I get it. Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. You can find the podcast there as well. We'll see you tomorrow. Until then, be well, be safe, be free. We'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company.